I'm Kris Davis, and this is Coffee Talk.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Perlak. I'm the chair of the guitar department at Berklee College of Music, and welcome to another Coffee Talk. As usual, we are joined by Sheryl Bailey, our assistant chair. Good morning, Sheryl.
Yeah, I'm on to my water because I've had a lot of coffee this morning already, so look out.
I've got my old school Berklee Guitar Department coffee mug, and it is full of this amazing brew that Julian, our work study student from Columbia, made, and it's gonna power me through the day. So I'm going to be switching to water soon as well. Also joining us is Ben Cody, our senior coordinator. Hey, Ben, good morning.
Morning.
And our special guest today is Kris Davis from Jazz and Gender Justice, the Institute here, and also from her incredible career as a pianist in the jazz community. Hey, Kris, how are you?
Good, how are you? I've also had too much coffee, so I'm with Sheryl. I'm going water.
Very smart. There's probably a lot to talk about there in terms of hydration and its benefits. Yeah, that we should
Well,
all explore.
I have a question for you. When you're writing or practicing, do you prefer to be, coffeeed up, caffeined up, or sort of?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I kind of feel like I can tell I have to have a baseline for focus.
Hmm.
And I can tell, especially, I'm kind of a person who has coffee in the morning and then I need one in the afternoon. And, in that early afternoon period, if I want to sit down and really focus, I do feel a difference when I have a cup of coffee. But I don't get jittery. I guess I don't drink enough coffee to get jittery. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about
Well,
you?
that's good. I feel like, well, when I drink a lot of coffee and then I write, I feel like everything I write is amazing.
Is it? Or do you just feel like it's
I
amazing?
feel like it's amazing. I'm like, yeah, I'm really getting to it and getting to something good. So I have to like go back later and make sure that it wasn't just my, caffeinated state of mind.
Yeah, yeah. There's kind of a famous story that goes around the guitar department about this one ensemble class, and the student said, I just don't understand it because when I'm hanging out with my friends and, they're and we're just hanging and clearly, in his story, there are a lot of substances involved in that hang. It's like, it just sounds amazing. But then later when I'm here, and I just like come cold, it just doesn't sound amazing. And the teacher said, it's possible that it never actually sounded amazing. Right? You should record yourself and listen back later, you know, because it's, what can color your impression, I guess, right?
Exactly. We can't
Yeah.
always trust our first impressions, which is true about performances too, right? Where
Yeah.
we play and then we're like, that sounded terrible. And then you go back and listen and you're like, oh yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, talk more about that because I think that's something really interesting because people will say the former all the time. Oh, I thought I sounded great, but then I listened to the recording, I heard all my mistakes. But what's also true is sometimes your perception is incorrect in the other way.
Totally. Yeah. I try not to trust that feeling or intuition. I try not to judge too much. Because it can go either way. You can think it was great and actually it wasn't that happening. And then other times it just maybe didn't feel very good, but something really special happened that you just weren't totally aware of because you were just in your
Mhm.
own zone. So yeah, I try to record things and listen back and then make some judgments about the performance.
Do you have a specific time that hops to mind when you had a sense that maybe things did not go well, and then later you realize, actually, that was really effective. It was really beautiful.
Yeah, that's happened so many times. I'm trying to think of an instance a story I could share. But it's too many times I've been in that situation where I thought it was terrible and then I listened back or the audience responded really positively. And again, the reverse too. So it's just not something you can really trust.
Do you think that when it happens and it's more positive than you perceived, do you come away from that feeling like, wow, maybe there was a whole sense of, preparation or readiness or communication in the moment that you kind of hadn't updated yourself to notice in your own playing?
Yeah, because sometimes you're judging, what you're doing, whether it's the physicality of something or, something you've been practicing that you're trying to get into the music,
Mhm.
but you're not always thinking about the connection or
Mhm.
with the other musicians or something that really special happened in the moment that was totally spontaneous. Sometimes we're too like focused in on, our own piece of what we're donating to the music and our involvement. So,
Mm.
yeah, just I'm always thinking about, when people are like, "Oh yeah, that was really good," or I listen back and I'm like, "Oh, I see the whole piece. I see the big picture, standing back and looking at it and the landscape." It's like, "Oh, this was actually pretty cool, and we had some good interactions and good moments."
Yeah. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how your perception of like what you focus on and what you think about as a performer has changed over time. I was just thinking about one of our conversations before, and you had shared that you had spent a lot of time in as a classical pianist and then transitioned in improvising. And I wonder if this kind of perception of listening to the whole more than focusing on your own performance in that moment, is that something that shifts for you when you play improvised music or music that someone else has composed or music that you've composed? Like, how does your own listening in the moment change?
Well, first I want to say I'm not a classical piano. I'm a classical pianist. I like classical music and I
Right?
practice it, but I would never play it in front of people. It's really like a way of researching for me.
Oh, cool.
Um, yeah, I guess, you're always wearing different hats. Like I find as a composer, I'll sometimes
Mhm.
get really obsessed with the composition element of it. And then I can't play very well because I'm like, is this working as with my composer hat on? So I'm always like looking at these moments through, I guess I would say different lenses as a composer or improviser, or then of course just the facility of playing the piano and like how did I execute the things I was trying to get to. I find that switching of roles very challenging, and I haven't, after 25 years, I haven't found a good way to to say like I can kind of do it all and multitask. It really like switches between that composer brain and then the performance brain.
Can you tell us more about the research part of your process? That I like that idea of thinking of classical music or other styles other than home base for you as research. And I think that younger players often don't give themselves permission to do that. Like, how did you come to that? Was it just through love of it or interest, or how did you grab onto things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I grew up playing classical music mostly like from the classical period or romantic period and dabbled a little bit in Bartok. That was like first kind of contemporary music. And I loved Bartok. I love the rhythmic aspect of his music. And I liked that it wasn't necessarily in a key, it was just exploring kind of different kinds of tonalities. But to me, the focus was really about the rhythm in a couple of these pieces I was playing. And so when I got into jazz and I moved to New York and got into more improvised music, I really love the idea of, when you're improvising with people on the spot, I think of it more as like spontaneous composition. Like we're all contributing as composers in the moment to making this piece happen, this thing happen. And I found that the role of the piano in jazz, and that was what I was, of course, most familiar with at that time, it didn't really fit very well into that context
Mm.
because I was like always having to lead, or I was leading the harmony by playing, voicings and chords and the sort of accompaniment of, comping as the pianist does. And I wanted that to be, when playing with other artists, I wanted it to be more collaborative in terms of building harmony together. So I had to kind of rethink like, how do I approach the piano that is this harmonic instrument and open things up so that the others can come in and start to build harmony, if we're developing some harmony in a moment, how are we gonna, do that more collaboratively and less with me directing it and sort of deciding. And so contemporary classical music sort of answered some of those questions. And I started listening to Morton Feldman and Luciano Berio and György Ligeti and some of these composers that sort of rethink the way we think about harmony, and instead of worrying too much about like a chord with a note on the bottom that says this is a G7 because I'm putting a G down there, it's more about the relationship of the intervals within the chord, and then whatever note you put on the bottom is just another part of the color. So you're starting to look at it more as like timbral and textural and density and range, instead of thinking about from the bottom up what it is harmonically. And that was really inspiring to me. So I got into, Berio's piano sequenza, which has all these kind of, clustery chords. They probably don't work very well on the guitar if you want to try and play them. But they fit well, in the piano under the hands. And yeah, exploring like what does it sound like to play a big cluster down low or up high, or combine things that are jazz shell kind of voicings, like with the tritone on the bottom and the perfect fourth on top with a big cluster on the bottom. Like, how does that sound? So these sorts of questions and explorations led to, I guess, my own kind of sound and way of dealing with free improvised music. And then coming full circle, where I started playing more tunes, more chord symbols again, more tunes with changes, and coming at it with that kind of a mentality really brought up some different ideas and approaches.
Okay, so there's a ton of things in there that I love, and I'm really smiling because I team teach a class in the guitar department called Spontaneous Composition with the improviser David Tronzo, and that our team up came from taking all the elements of improvised music in free jazz, and then also in modern classical music. And because we're two guitarists, some of our exploration of what you're talking about came to, like, you can't play certain clusters on one guitar, but you can play them on two guitars. And then you have double timbres, right? And we can also do, David is a slide guitar player, so a lot of his thinking is dyadic because that's how the hand works. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm just like sort of pretending I'm holding a slide, and you can see right there, it's going to be two notes. And then if I, as a classical guitar, stick other notes around that, then it's kind of like, well, it can arrive where we want it to arrive. And that's how we got to that issue that you're talking about, because guitar can fall into that same role of if we play a chord, if we play triads, then you hear a fundamental, like a resolution there, or you hear a key center, and maybe you want it to be more open so it could arrive somewhere else because of someone else's contribution. And thinking of it like as a spontaneous composition allows it to have this form that builds in real time. So that's such a cool parallel of guitar and piano there.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting, like when we improvise, as like growing up in like Western culture, we often gravitate first towards harmony and melody, and less if we think about like the elements of music being harmony, melody, rhythm, form, timbre, dynamics. What if we kind of come at it through another lens of like, what if we start with rhythm? What does that lead us into? Or what if we start with a timbral approach? We're not worried so much about harmony, but how to make one note sound, in all these different ways. So that's really exciting to me. And I feel like it's not something that's explored enough.
Oh man, we could be nerdy about this for forever. We won't torture all of you for hours, but we could, because that idea of coming to composition with the idea that tone is a structural element is really beautiful. That's amazing. So we're lucky because in this conversation, we have two New Yorkers here. And I want to touch on something you said, Kris, about moving to New York and getting into improvisation in that place. And then have you and Sheryl talk a little bit about your experiences building your life there in music, because a lot of our students, that's where they'd like to go. It's such a creative place. It's such a center for all kinds of styles of music. And I think it would be really interesting, Kris, you could take it however you'd like, to share a little bit of your experience of going there and arriving and finding your place there, and talking a little bit with us about how it developed your music and your musical relationships.
Yeah, I moved there in 2001. It was 2 weeks before September 11th. So everything, I thought I was going into one New York, and everything changed in 2 weeks, which was really interesting and challenging, and of course, horrible, and all of the things. um, but I moved there right out of school, so I didn't really have like I didn't know who I was as a musician. I was trying to figure it out. I played in I studied jazz piano and studied more traditional forms of jazz and learned a ton of standards. I was coming from Toronto at the time. And I sort of got interested in free improvisation through doing a summer workshop at the Banff Center for the Arts. And that's where I met some of the Berklee faculty now, like Kenny Warner and Tony Malaby. They were all teaching there, and they were really interested in improvised music, and they would, play something improvised, and then especially Tony would have this very specific thing that he was looking for from the other musicians. And I thought, like, wow, like this is supposed to be free, but it's like something really specific. There's some rules or something going on here that I don't understand. So this sort of sparked some curiosity about improvised music. So when I moved to New York, I reached out to him and started just playing sessions on the weekends with other young musicians, and he would give us some direction and some support. And I don't know, I guess just playing more free improvised music, I met more and more people that were interested in it, who had fruitful and successful careers in that world. And, I guess I thought at the time, like, well, can you actually have a career playing this kind of music or exploring it? And it slowly revealed itself that, like, actually you can, and there's a lot of people, and there's a very strong scene in New York based around, more, I mean, whatever you want to call it, experimental music or new music, or there's all sorts of words. The other thing I loved about that scene was that it wasn't just jazz people in that world. It was a lot of classical people who were improvising, people coming from different musical traditions, and improvised music was like the center of, like, we can meet and make something together even if we don't totally speak the same language and come from the same traditions. So I just love that, and through that I was exposed to so much diversity of musical interests, of people from people all over the world. I teach at the Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice, and that particular experience of being in improvised music to me was very gender balanced. There was equity, gender equity, much more than in the jazz world. So I kind of came up into the music through these different lines, and I just found that there were things about jazz that really spoke to me and that I loved, but there were things about it that I didn't love, and it didn't resonate with me as much. And through improvised music, I was able to take my other influences and interests, like contemporary classical music, or I was playing in a Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan tribute band for a couple of years. And so I like learned all this, like, this beautiful, like, Pakistani music, playing the harmonium, and like that's in my music, maybe not in obvious ways, but to me, I hear it in there. So all of these influences, and in improvised music, I was really able to explore that and see a possibility of having a fruitful career as a performer and composer.
That's great. I love that is a band like that. That's amazing.
We were called the Brooklyn Kowali Party.
Makes me so happy. That's so great. Sheryl, what's on your mind as you hear about that? Because you clearly found your way in the same city in a different part of the music scene and the music community. So I'm handing it over to you.
Yeah, well, I am always a biased New Yorker. It always comes through because of the openness of the place, the openness of the people, whether you're in the music scene or not. Everybody's thrown together. You take the subway from uptown to downtown or back and forth, you're sharing a train car with every walk of life. And everybody, maybe they don't like each other, but everybody gets along and everybody communicates. And that's true about the music scene there too. And I think that's the openness. I always feel like New York is a magnifier, and what you go, I've experimented with this too myself. If you go out in a bad mood, you're going to get a lot of bad vibes back at you. And if you just let go of that and you go out in an open mind, all kinds of amazing things will happen. People you meet, but I think that is true. But I mean, for me, I went to New York with, I came a little older. I had lived in Baltimore, and I had to, for myself, that was important. I had to go out there and be a leader and a writer and do that and kind of build my chops. And then, kind of become, as they always say, New York is the big pond. So you become a big fish in a small pond, and then all the big fish go into the big pond. That's New York, is the big pond. And you want to see if you can hang, right? So, you kind of go there maybe with one thing in mind, but then it takes you in all kinds of directions. And that's what happened for me, because I do love lots of different things. I played, in the Fraggle Rock house band, playing Led Zeppelin, being musical director of the Led Zeppelin show, and we did Bohemian Rhapsody and like all, just anything from that to, working with the klezmer master David Krakauer, and just like taking that music in, and that music really influences me a lot in my jazz playing. So yeah, it's a big pond and there's a lot of stuff, and I feel if you're open for it, it'll expand you in ways you wouldn't believe. And that because of that too, because of all these communities that come together, and like the Brazilian churro scene, and I mean, like you can make a lot of different things happen, but you can really grow and challenge yourself as a musician. And yeah, it kind of opens doors to the world that way. You start working with certain people, and then next thing you know, you're touring Brazil, or you're touring, these different places, because it is an international center. So I don't know. I'm a big New York fan.
Me too.
Kris,
You.
Kris, what's a tangible thing, like a tangible thing that someone could do if they're listening to this and, they're trying to take it on faith from you two, that you go there and you start meeting people and doing things, and doors open and things happen. Like, what's something that you could advise someone to do that's a tangible?
Oh my gosh, so many things.
That's good. That's good that they're going to hear there's so many things, but
Well,
you know.
first, I wanted to say that, when I moved to New York, I didn't know who I was as a player at all. And in fact, I was going through this transition of like kind of going into this other realm of the music. So, like Sheryl said, I was really open, and I really encourage people when they go there to stay open and see what's available, because there's just so many different kinds of opportunities. And I'm sure Sheryl would say, like, playing in the klezmer band, all these things that like really influence and gave you like a foundation for just understanding how to work with people, talk to people, like learn something that you're not comfortable with, and be thrown into these situations is like that's all going to affect how you operate, later on in your career. So some tangible things. Well, when I moved to New York, I hadn't gone to school in the States, so I only knew like 4 people. So I feel like if you go to Berklee, you already have like a network you can tap into, because so many people go there and start working on their careers. But reach out to all the people that you're connected to. Start to play sessions. When I was there, I didn't go to jam sessions at clubs. We mostly set up sessions through going to people's houses. Sheryl, was that the same for you?
Totally, totally. There are always people, or I might go to a jam session to maybe meet some people, and then, everybody was like, yeah, Tuesday at noon. Yeah, let's play. It was great.
Yeah, I mean, once you know like 2 or 3 people, then they invite their friends and you start to build this network. Um, So I would say, try to set up as many sessions as possible and play. Spread the word that you're looking for work because you got to make money somehow. For me, I taught a lot. I did a lot of private teaching, and that was a great way for me to work on my career in terms of networking, going to see shows at night, and then I could practice and play sessions in the morning, and then teach in the afternoon. So that was a really great way to make a living and keep doing working towards what you're working on. What else? I'm trying to think what else. Oh,
I'd like to chime in on that.
go, go.
I always tell folks, but speak guitar player, get a drum kit, get a cheap little drum kit and a keyboard that you have so you can always have something to play. And also, well, I always tell guitar players, get to know the guitar players because that's who's going to call you when they need a sub.
That's right.
Right. And so, I mean, that was always my plan of attack. Plus, I would get a little duo gig for guitar, and then I'd get to play with all these great guitarists. And then, you're like, oh, okay, now you're on the radar. I think it's about getting on the radar, really.
Mm.
Totally. And for me, that was a really slow process because I didn't know so many people. So I had three journals. I had like a journal, like a personal journal, and then I had a journal of my musical goals and like, what do I want to get better at by next week? What do I want to be better at in a month from now? How many tunes do I want to write? How am I going to do all of these kinds of goals or work towards these goals? And then I had like career goals, like if I can play one gig this year of my own, like I am successful. And so I would try to celebrate that, and I would also expect that of of all the seeds I was putting out there for opportunities, I would just expect that at least 80 to 90% were going to be no's, but 10% would be yeses. So if I'm putting out that much, that's what's coming back. And then that starts to shift as time goes by. It's like, okay, 20% yes, 80% no's, but you have to get used to receiving no as an answer. It's just part of growing a career and being an artist and starting out. But try to really celebrate the successes. That's what I tell my students because those few little things that start to build and snowball. And if you can stay in there long enough and stay positive and keep working towards the things that you care about, you're going to be good.
That's great. I think all of us, all four of us on this call for sure, and so many of us at Berklee embody a lot of that openness, stylistic openness, learning from other people. And I know that you've brought a lot of that to the Institute. And I'm wondering if you could maybe start talking about that a little bit by sharing with us some of the things you're really excited about in your role and kind of give us a sense of how you're thinking about it.
Oh my gosh, so many things.
I know there's so many things, so you can start wherever you want, and then we can go wherever you'd like. That's hours of conversation, but maybe what's one thing from your perspective now that you think has been really cool?
Well, one thing I really love about the Institute is on Monday nights we have these gatherings or open forums, and anyone's welcome to come. They're Mondays, 6:30 to 8:30, and we always have amazing guest artists. And in addition to like learning about their artistry and their craft, they also just talk about the cultural context and their own personal experiences. And there's always a lot of conversation and candidness about being, if we have a woman, being a woman in that field and just some of the challenges they've faced and how they've overcome some of these challenges. And
Mhm.
it's so beautiful to hear people share that side of their experience with young people. And I do a lot of guest teaching all over the place, quite a bit in Europe. And these kinds of conversations I feel are just not happening like they are here at Berklee, where we can really say like, here's what it is. Like, we want it to change. So that candidness is something I really love about the Institute.
There was a lunchtime hang that Terry led, Terry Lynn Carrington, for people who are listening. And that was an invitation to go to the gathering. So I had gone to the lunch and then came to a gathering. And one of the themes that I thought was so great is to think about from the perspective of jazz and gender justice, what do we miss when we only focus on a small group of people who maybe have a similar background or perspective? What do we miss? What are the voices that we're not hearing? And then if we did open up to allowing more of that in, how would we think of all of modern music and all of the styles of that music, and what would we all gain? And I think that's such a great way to think about this, is not just from some of the hardship and the negativity, which is part of people's personal experience at times, but also what's all the richness that we would gain if we opened up our perspective. I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on that to share.
Yeah, I mean, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about I'm doing a concert at the Kennedy Center on Saturday for the Jazz Piano Christmas. So I've been working up my Let It Snow and Dance with the Sugar Plum Fairy. And I don't know if this is gonna make any sense to what you were just asking about, but I was like, I've always like struggled with Christmas carols because they're kind of like boxy. They don't harmonically, they're not always very interesting, and I never know what to do. So like I checked out Jerry Allen's like Christmas, album, and I was like, oh yes, okay, that's like clarity. And I don't know, this is probably not relating to gender in any way, but I was just like, I don't know, it's just something about like, also I'm like, what am I gonna wear? Like, am I gonna wear like the big green Grammy dress, or I'm gonna like go, pants and suit and like, all these things that I'm trying to figure out. And I just sometimes I'm like, I wish I had more like role models, like more like elders, who like I could look at like a wider scope to say like, how would they deal with this situation?
I really like what you're saying, because even that idea of like, oh yeah, like what is the canon of what we're listening to? And sometimes you think of the same five people because that's who your teacher learned from and that's who's in the thing. And maybe like for me in classical guitar, a lot of them are men who are wonderful musicians, but they all have giant hands and they play these big sounding guitars. And and then when someone says like, oh, have you heard this other record? You're like, oh, wow, that's like a different instrument, a different approach, a different set of hands, like a different, making that sound. And thinking of Jerry Allen as a person where you're like, okay, that if that was part of like the canon of how jazz musicians approach Christmas music, like that would make maybe everyone's approach different, as opposed to just going the same. Okay, I have the Duke Ellington record, which is amazing, but it's one way of looking at it, right? Instead of saying this is the only way.
Yeah, and what you bring up about the hands is like also a problem for piano, where like a lot of guys can reach a tenth and sound great playing stride piano, and like I can't. I've got a ninth and that's it. So like what do people do when they have smaller hands, or so it would just be nice to have more people to look to, and like I hope I think things are changing and shifting, and then that's not going to be as much of an issue, for our students as they start to, as time passes by, and we're seeing more people, representing different genders and races, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Ben always jumps in at an opportune moment and asks a question. And maybe this is a good time, Ben, because there's so many great things out on the table now.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so we ask every guest this question, and it's always exciting because we always have some really cool answers. But the question is, what is something that the students should be asking right now that they might not be thinking of asking?
Oh. I don't know. I mean, can you give me like a topic or that's a pretty broad
It
term.
is, yeah, yeah. I guess just something that I guess thinking back, maybe putting yourself, in you know, uh, just that situation of a student. What's something that looking back, maybe you think that someone coming into, student here at Berkeley, something that they should be thinking about that they aren't?
Yeah, I think if you think about it, like you're in a forum and you have guests and the students, there's a whole section of these forums where students can ask questions. And, there's this moment where you're hoping someone would ask a certain question, or you're thinking like, what, if I was you, here's what I would want to know from this person. If you have one of those that jumps to mind.
Um, my question is super broad.
Yeah, go. Yeah, that's
But
great.
like, how do you build a career around the music that you love and be authentically you in that?
Yes. I think it was you. I'm gonna attribute this thing that I've thought about for months now to our conversation when we had coffee that time. It's like, think about the how. Like, how are you gonna do this? Not just what do you want to do, but how do you want to do it? And
Yeah.
I really love that you kept a journal for that when you were young. And I'm wondering, is that something you still do? Do you still, at different stages of your life, did you carry through that sort of intentionality about the how and not just the what?
Yeah, I'm a Capricorn, so I'm like a classic Capricorn. Very methodical about the way that I go about things, which has its benefits and its negatives too, in some ways. But that whole thing of keeping a journal and keeping goals and lists and things has always been part of my practice, and I still do that now. And it was interesting. About 10 years ago, I won this big award from the Doris Duke Artist Award. And for 2 or 3 days, you go and do some classes around like career growth and money management, all sorts of things. But one of the things they gave us was a booklet of exactly like the journal I had of, what are your 5-year goals? What are your 10-year goals? What are your 1-year goals? Like, how are you gonna, and it was just this, it was a journal. And I was like, oh, wow, I guess I was doing something right all along, because it wasn't something someone ever taught me. I don't even know why I started writing these journals and keeping these lists, but it gave me something tangible and a way to manage all the things that I wanted to do. And it's funny now because my son's 11 and he has a class called 21st Century Skills. And this was the first thing they did. It was like,
Oh,
they're called SMART goals. So if you want to learn more about organizing around goals, just type in SMART goals, which basically mean specific, time bound, measurable, all these things. So it's easily found.
that's really cool. I mean, I guess this is a question for you, Kris, and then maybe also for Sheryl and Ben. What I like about what you just said was that you claimed it early on. You sort of said like, okay, this is how I want to do this for me. And I wonder, for a lot of young students that sometimes we'll ask them like, well, what do you want your sound to be? Or what do you want your career to be? And there's like almost an insecurity to claim it. Like, well, what should I be doing? And what's the right thing to do? Or what if I don't make it? Or what if there's sort of like fear of claiming it for a variety of reasons. And I'm wondering have you experienced that? And if you did, how did you get through it? And do you see that with students?
Well, you can change these things. So, like when I moved to New York, I was like, I want to be a burning jazz bebop pianist. I want to have a record on Blue Note. I want to do all this. I want to be a young lion, all these things. Um, and as time went by, it was like, oh, but I'm really interested in the more improvised music and composition and blending these two worlds. And that has nothing to do with being a burning jazz bebop piano player. So like that, all those goals and plans got thrown out the window. And then it's like, okay, now time to make new lists. So you keep kind of revisiting, and you don't have to know all the answers, but you keep revisiting through the process and see like, is this changed? Where am I at now? And that's normal. It should be shifting.
I like that you're saying it's normal, because I think some people feel like when something changes, it implies that there was a failure. And that's not true. What's true is that now it just changed, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
and you're figuring out who you are and who you want to be in
right.
this thing you're pursuing. And that's sort of leads back to that question of authenticity. It's like you start to realize like, but this is what I really care about. This is actually what I'm good at. You know, you start to find that along the way so that inevitably your goals and plans are going to shift.
Sheryl, I see you nodding there. Do you have a similar sense of that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would say the same thing. I agree with all that. And also, I've done that too, found, made journals of goals. And actually, I'm in the process of moving, so I'm going through a lot of stuff. I have to throw a lot, and I come across those even, from early days. And it's really funny because you look at me and go, oh, I did get that. That did happen.
Hmm.
Wow. Or you see something and you go, oh yeah, that was maybe an intention and it didn't happen, but something better happened or something changed. So I think it's about that willingness to be creative. And yeah, it's like neuroplasticity, the plastic brain, like it can change, it's changeable. You change, situation changes, and it's all good. But I think that process, it just does get you to know yourself better and makes you stronger inside. I love that.
Yeah. Ben, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's a balance between being able and willing to change and also still kind of claiming what you want to do with your career. Because like for me, I mean, especially right after graduating Berklee, I always just wanted to be in control of have it be my band, be a band leader, and I was okay with the ramifications of that, which was before I got this job at Berklee, I was gigging a lot with my band, but you're not making a lot of money, so I was working at a gas station pumping gas. I was working at Hannaford in the produce department and teaching privately in between all that just to kind of make ends meet. And I was okay with that at the time because, it's like I'd like, being in control. That was the priority for me. And then I was very fortunate to get this job. And, I had other aspects of my career that opened up a lot of opportunities, like, my social media and things like that. So the initial goal, the initial priority, I think is still there for me, but a lot has changed around that, and that's had to be flexible too. And and that's just for me. So I think for everyone, it's just kind of really establishing what's your priority with your career and being able to make that commitment to it, but also still be flexible in a balanced way, and maybe you want to change priority completely, and that's fine too.
Hmm.
Maybe that will change for me someday. Right now it hasn't quite happened yet, but yeah, it's just kind of seeing the big picture and being able to balance it and do what's needed to do around that.
My current journal is sitting right here on the desk. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding it up. Um, because it's been a really interesting year for me. I've been reuniting with a lot of past friends from different parts of my life. And Kris reminds me of something that we talked about one time where you're talking about, you kind of move to a place and then you find the people who are doing what you love and you start to build those relationships and see what comes of it. And I think as I've been reconnecting with people from my different cities, one thing that comes up all the time in classical music is it's such a mentorship culture. And as you kind of find yourself, you kind of move maybe near and then away from what your teachers did. And there's that sense of if you move too far away, have you failed on that path? And I think that it gets ingrained so young that, when you look up to people, um, how closely do you have to follow what they did? And I was sitting with some incredible players at the Yale School of Music who are, they're in their early 20s and they're virtuosi, young players and talking about these things. And one guy said, oh, I think I've already failed at the traditional path. And I said, Valita, tell me what you think that is. And he said, well, it's where you do these competitions and then you go right for a university job. And we just start talking about the idea of like a path is not necessarily a path. It's just what someone else did. And maybe that's right for you, but maybe what you're doing is a different path. Like you're making a path. There isn't like a path and then you either are on it or you're not. And you have this consolation prize avenue or something. It's just that someone you love and respect did something. And what you do might be different than what that person did but there's something that gets in our brain, like if we didn't do what that person who taught us did, then we haven't really succeeded. And I would love it if we could all let that go. I mean, what do you think of? I see you nodding, Kris, and I wonder if that happens in your community as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can't like forget, we can't take an artist out of like the cultural context and the time of that moment too, and those opportunities that were available or not available. So to compare yourself to your teacher or even someone else's path, of another time period, it doesn't really make sense to me in any way. I mean, like when I was coming up, there were some smaller labels where they would like give you some money to record and, put your projects out. And now that's basically non-existent. So, but now there's like a lot more grants for artists to apply for. So I don't know. I just, that's going to shape things a certain way. Yeah, I don't think you can really compare, and it's important to remember, like, we're all making this up as we go along.
Yeah, and someone looks really confident.
Yeah,
But they
exactly.
are in certain ways. They're teaching you things. But sometimes we also forget, well, that person did that, but maybe that person's 25 years older than you
Hmm.
or 40 years older than you. And
Yeah.
and it is okay to, you're going to find your own way and it can be just as successful.
Yeah, I remember Henry Threadgill was talking about like, if you don't know Henry Threadgill, wonderful composer and Pulitzer winner, and he just wrote a really great book about his life as well, which I highly recommend checking out. But he came up and he was drafted into the war, and he wrote for military bands, and so his music has like all of that in there, in addition to being part of the AACM and this kind of autodidactic way of learning music and improvisation. So that's all in there, and we can't. He's like, people try to recreate or write the way that I write, but you have to remember it was like part of the cultural context of which I was coming up. So, I mean, that's in addition to the idea of like building a career just musically, when we're trying to like draw from someone's experiences or recreate what they're doing musically, it doesn't really work that way.
Right. You and Sheryl both alluded to this reality that we also face. Like sometimes, you're going to go out and you're going to try a bunch of different things and not everything is going to work the way you want. You're going to hear the word no. And you also may be in some situations with people who don't treat you the way you would like to be treated. And I think there's a lot of apprehension coming out of, especially when you come out of a school environment that is positive. What's your advice to people as they kind of get out there and then they're in all kinds of different situations? Do you have advice for people who are going into a new situation and might not have a positive experience of how to deal with it and grow from it or move on from it?
Well, I think it's important to find places where you're going to feel supported, where you can thrive. It's also important to be uncomfortable. Those are equally valid and important experiences. Not to be unsafe. You and I were talking about that.
Yeah.
But just to recognize like where eventually you want to be and where you want to operate. I used to do some accompanying for a cabaret singer, and she worked with her husband, who was this writer director, and they were like the nicest people. And then you'd get in there with them, and they would like just yell at each other. It was like total nightmare, and all the band were all sitting there like caught in this middle of this, terrible exchange between this husband and wife. And eventually I was like, this is not what I want to be a part of. I do not want to rehearse like this. I don't want to be in the crossfire. So, that showed me that, yeah, that's not a path I want to, pursue, and I'm going to go somewhere else. I also played piano in a hotel band for like 4 months at the Banff Springs Hotel. And this was when I was still in school. And it was great opportunity because I was playing every day, but the dynamics of playing with the same band who aren't necessarily on the same page about the kind of music, you know, and playing like dinner music every night. It just, I was like, I'd rather be like an accountant than do this. So I just thought, I'm not going to do those kinds of gigs anymore. And it's important to start working towards the things that inspire you, that make you feel empowered and
Mhm.
excited about music. Otherwise, what's the point?
I like that a lot. I mean, I want to reiterate something you said, Kris, that Sheryl and I've talked about and that we've talked about on the podcast before, that there is a big difference between being uncomfortable and being unsafe. And anytime you feel like you're in an unsafe situation, you really feel that, you get out of there.
Yeah.
Get out of there however you can. If you're uncomfortable, you do get to choose. And you can choose to stay for a while because you need the money or because there's a musical reason to stay. And then over time, you do start to kind of establish, okay, I'm done. I'm going to set a boundary here. And Sheryl, I wonder, you're nodding to that. Like, what's your reaction to that? You're good. Cheryl's like, you're like a decider when it comes to this. And so I think you're going to have something to share here.
No, I agree with Kris. I've definitely been in those situations. Sometimes that that makes you clearer on what you want by experience what you don't want. And I've definitely been in some situations where I made that try. I said, you know what? I need to work with this person for my career. It looks great on my resume. So there's an end point, and I know that. So you make that agreement with yourself and you get out. So, I think eh, that makes it clearer about what your values are and where you want to go and who you want to spend your time with. So yeah, I think that's important to keep that in perspective um, when you get in that situation. There's gonna be an expiration date, and so what you want to get out of there, and then that date comes, and you go on, and you go on to your next thing, which is gonna be better. It's always gonna be better. Once you hit the bottom, you only go up from there.
Well, also too, if you're playing with people, everyone has a different threshold, right? So someone may say like, okay, this is a hard no for me, but then you might say, well, okay, I'm not thrilled, but I need it for X. Or you might be the other person in that situation. And then you may negotiate to stay because someone else needs it that you're working with. So there's all kinds of machinations of it, right?
Yeah, I remember someone at it was a JGJ, I guess, came and said if it meets like two of the three criteria. Have you heard this?
No, but it's kind of like when you get your car fixed, right? Like fast,
Yeah.
good, and cheap or something, right? So go ahead.
Yeah, it's either like it's money, it's like growth or like networking, or it's like you're gonna learn something. So if it has two of those three, I don't know, I have to think about if I think about it that way, but I like the idea.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, no matter where we go in music, we're still in the people business. So you're still having to deal with people and music.
Yeah,
Um,
and I'm, being from Canada, I'm very much like a people pleaser. Like I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and I remember like sometimes I did things way too long just to like,
mhm.
try to whatever, spare someone's feelings. And I remember the moment when I decided that was not going to happen anymore, and I got called for this gig, and I went to the rehearsal, and within 10 minutes, I knew that this was not worth my time, and I just didn't want to be there. And so I stood up and I said, "I'm so sorry, but I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. It's just not the right fit for me." And they were like, "Thank you for telling me." And I walked out, and no harm done. And I was it was the right move. So, there's
Yeah.
a time and place for standing up for,
Mhm.
what you feel in that moment.
Well, I'm partially Canadian, so I do relate to that quite a bit.
You've been conditioned.
Yeah. I have it in my blood as well, so I understand. And I went through a period where all of my roommates were Canadians, and so we had to take lessons from people like Sheryl and and Ben a little bit. Cheryl, you're good. I feel like you know where you feel comfortable. Like you've hit a point in your life where you can say it.
Yeah,
Now you're
that's
just
what
laughing.
age does for you.
Um,
Yeah,
okay.
that's why we must connect so well. We've got that Canadian, thing.
I'm only a quarter, but it's a strong quarter. You know?
That's important. I guess I should have known, like the whole laughing after you say things that aren't funny, that's like very Canadian. I do that all the time. And I saw you do that once and I was like, oh, wow, maybe she's Canadian.
I'm honored. My Canadian friends would be so proud that I've kept that going. Um, Kris, you also run a really wonderful summer program and a workshop. And I think that it's kind of cool that you do this because it's almost like you're kind of creating an opportunity that maybe you had in a different way when you were younger or wish you had. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I started a workshop with Angelica Sanchez, who's a wonderful pianist and teaches at Bard College, and it's called the International Music Creators and Collaborators Workshop. And we did it last year. It was the first year for 1 week at Bard College, and it was a partnership between Berklee and Bard, and also a not-for-profit that I run called Pyroclastic Arts. And then the idea is just to support young, emerging, early career artists and give them a chance to meet people from all over the world. It's a real international cohort. The level's very high, and work with some amazing faculty artists. We had Dave Holland and Billy Hart and Terry Lynn came, and then also give them a chance to explore kind of interdisciplinary approaches to music, blending like dance and music, and just dipping their toe into that because I think we're all experiencing these kind of like cross-pollination at the moment. So yeah, we're working on the second round for next year, and it's very exciting. For me, like coming from Toronto and growing up in Canada, I couldn't afford to go to school in the States. And the Banff Center for the Arts, that program I was mentioning, I went there for 3 weeks, and that's where I met people again, like Tony Malaby and just other like young artists that were living in New York at the time. And that's how I developed just from those few weeks. That's how I met people so that I could then go on to New York and grow something. So I'm really passionate about creating this workshop where people from all over the world can come, and there's some scholarships available through Berklee, which has been amazing to have that support. And yeah, it's growing.
That's so cool. What are you most excited about now that you're working on?
Ooh. I mean, there's so many things that I really love composing still very much. And I wrote some music for a string quintet from Poland called the Lutoslawski Quartet. And I spent about 8 months writing for them. And we just premiered the piece a couple weeks ago and recorded it. And I just have that fire again to get back in and start composing. I'm writing some more music for this trio that we played with at Berklee at Cafe 939. So we're getting ready for some tours and things coming up, and just want to create more material and things for us to play with. So yeah, composition is the thing I'm still really, really passionate about. And then just again supporting young people that are, driven and want to build a career in music, and creating this workshop. And I run a record label, and just providing opportunities for people to put their creations out. It's really inspiring.
Right. Ben, as we're kind of coming to the end of our cup of coffee, I wonder if there's something on your mind or a question that you might have that you think other alums would have for Kris.
Well, actually, I just want to go back to the beginning of this when Kris mentioned, I like how your ideology of looking at other genres as research rather than because my experience here, and also I guess kind of to quote what Sheryl said as well in this, coming to Berklee, I feel like a lot of Berkeley students can attest to almost feeling like you were a big fish in a small pond from wherever you were, and then you get to Berkeley, and then everyone's good, and then so you kind of have some identity crisis for a while. So I feel like, in my experience, stylistically is kind of where you find your identity at Berkeley as a student. So like, I think it's great not to get too caught up in that when you're here, because even though that might be your identity of, well, everyone here is good, but I'm the rock player, or I'm something like that, and not to get too have your blinders on too much, and be able to, even not saying it's changing what you're trying to accomplish, but think of it more as research as really who you're trying to change. Because I think that's really important, especially as a student here, when you don't want to be too rigid yet,
Yeah, that's such a good point. And it's important to have a growth mindset, where you're like, let me see what's out there. Let me not decide what I think or, quite yet. Just like let's get into the research part of things and not make decisions about who and what I am and what's happening here. So, and I've done that throughout my career in different times where I was less open maybe to things, and then suddenly I was like, you know what? I need to be more open. And it's been like a conscious choice to decide when to then, really stop making hardcore decisions about, what I thought I was or what, I was doing. For instance, like I finished school and I moved to New York in 2001. And then about 8 years later, I decided to go and get a degree in classical composition at City College. And that was like, I had no experience writing classical music or what what that was, but I just thought, yeah, I need some like new input. I need to be uncomfortable. I need to learn, and I'm gonna put myself in this position to just open. And I felt like as soon as I did that, everything kind of changed. Like the way people saw me, the way I saw myself, the way people talked to me. I felt like it all shifted in a way, in a really positive way. So sometimes we can all kind of get dogmatic about things, but it's just important to remember to like keep growing, and that never stops.
Sheryl, what about you? What's on your mind?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much great stuff that we've talked about in this podcast, but I'd like that thought. I mean, I think the thread of all of this is openness.
Yeah.
It's being open, listening and being open, which is what a great improviser has to do all the time. So as we're improvising our lives, listen and be open.
Oh, I like that. I like that. And I really appreciate, especially at this time in the semester, for those of you who are in school, or really for anyone who's listening, you're coming to the end of a year, and to think about ways that you can be open and continue to grow, and also find a way to accept who you are as you do that. These are really great thoughts, especially for this time of year. So thank you so much, Kris, for.
Yeah. And, I just wanted to add one thing to what Ben had said, which is that, sometimes we get into this competitive mindset and we're like, oh, this person's better than me or whatever. Like a lot of times, and this continues again for your whole career, it's if you feel that about somebody, it's important to get to know them, reach out, hang out with them, because you start to realize they're just people just like you who have challenges and fears and, struggles. And it just makes them more human. So that's kind of a good way I've found to deal with feelings of competition in general.
I like that a lot. And also that idea of like and dislike. If you hear something and you're like, oh, I don't like it, maybe listen to it more and get to know it and think about where that comes from.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. So obviously we're going to keep hanging out, everyone. But thank you all for being with us. Ben, thank you so much for being here. Sheryl, thank you. And Kris Davis, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun
Today.
to chat on Coffee Talk.
And thank you all for listening. And we will be with you on the next Coffee Talk.